Do you ever feel like life isn't going the way that you thought it was going to go? That you and God had a plan? This is a message from Psalm 142. The life of David. David was a young boy, a shepherd boy, the youngest of his brothers. So whenever anything important was about to happen, you could be sure that David was not there. He was out taking care of his family's sheep. He's doing his younger brother thing, something that he had probably done for many years on every Halloween or family business gathering. So on what was to be the most momentous day of his life, he was watching sheep. And he had no idea that the trajectory of his life was about to change forever. A prophet had come to town, and not just any prophet, Samuel, the prophet of King Saul. Now, King Saul was known throughout the land. He was a mighty man, powerful king. He was the first king. I imagine that the entire nation was kind of in awe of him. He was tall, dark, and handsome. Literally, the Bible says so. But Samuel was not sent by Saul. Indeed, God was acting in the way that he often does, surprisingly, in an upside down, inside out kind of way. So on the day that Samuel comes to the home of David's father, when the brothers have heard that he's in town to anoint a different king, their dad lines them all up, all of them, but David. He is considered to be so insubstantial that they don't even bother to pull him in from the shepherd fields. And you know how the story goes. Samuel takes a long, slow look, sizes up the brothers, and says to David's dad, Do you have another son? And so it's on that day that David learns the trajectory of his life, God's plan for him and his will, his meaning and his destiny. Samuel, by the voice of the Lord, anoints David as the next king over Israel. He's chosen. David is chosen, and there's no question that Saul will remain king, but from this point forward, David will grow knowing that that is his destiny, and he will grow in his closeness to God. And Saul will walk away from God step by step, relying more and more on his own power. Back out to the fields, back to the irritating sheep that keeps getting lost, the one that can't keep up. Back out to the fields where boredom can sometimes overtake you and there's nothing to do. David's out there and he's learning to play his harp. It's really kind of more like campfire guitar, okay? It's a stringed instrument. It was the instrument of its time. So he's out there playing his harp and probably writing some teenage poetry, and you know how that usually goes. But the thing is, David is getting good on his harp, and he's getting good with his poetry too. And I'm sure David was beginning to cultivate an already rich relationship with God. God had told him his plan for his life, and David was trusting that plan. And then there's the day that his older brothers go off to fight the Philistines. So David, again, still in little brother role, he's not allowed to go. He's allowed to run lunch over on the regular. That's how he gets involved in the situation. He sees his countrymen being taunted by this massive Philistine. They've chosen to fight for the Philistine sides, and nobody will go up against him on the Hebrew side. And mind you, that Saul is there. Tall, dark, and handsome Saul. And David puts himself forward for the role, not to show off, not to become a hero. That's not what motivates him. What motivates David is that the Philistine is smack-talking Yahweh. Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. And David gets really worked up when God's name is on the line. And you know how the story goes. From that day forward, David is called to live in the royal palace. He is eventually inscripted into Saul's army. He is his private musician, and he becomes like the right hand to Saul. So we can only understand the despair of David's psalm, Psalm 142, when we have understood the heights to which God had taken David. David saw every sign that God was acting in his life. God was bringing about good for him. What else could it mean? That he had been called to the royal palace. That King Saul can't even go to sleep without David's help. David is the insider of all insiders, not just in the palace, but in the very work of God, surely, because God was on the side of the king. All the trajectories were on target. And he doesn't just serve the king, he knows the king. He knows his moods, he knows his family dynamics, he knows his intrigue, the court intrigue, he knows his battle strategies. And it must have felt to David like the path to becoming king was going pretty smoothly. He was of such value to the king, it's not really that hard to imagine that he could have been placed in line for the throne. And he must have wondered, would some demise befall Saul? Would he be killed in battle or die in his sleep? When God calls you to follow him, he may take you on a different path than you thought. Because see, from this point, it all starts to go wrong. It starts to go wrong when the young girls come out to meet the soldiers. You know, the teenage girls coming out to see other tall, dark, and handsome men. And they would sing their songs about Saul, and they would sing about his strength and his glory and his victories. But on this day, the girls started singing a new song. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Ooh. There's a new song, and it is stuck in Saul's head. You know when you sometimes get a song stuck in your head? My little niece Sophie tells me, Aunt Terri, I know what to do when you get a song stuck in your head. Just spin your head around and around and around really fast and then slam it on the floor. That's her remedy. I think it would have worked better for Saul if he would have done that, if he could have got that song out of his head. But instead he was clinging to his power and his desires, the life that he had made for himself. See, he was once called by God too. But he changed his own trajectory, step by step. What he tries instead is this. In his jealousy of David, he purposes in his heart that he will send David out to the front lines over and over and over again in front of the Philistines, and they'll eventually do him in, and he won't have to kill him himself. Such deceit, such betrayal, such trickery. David has lived with the king for years. He has served him faithfully for years. He has risked his life for king and country, and now David will be forced to run for his life. Have you ever felt like God called you to something and you poured your heart into it and then he let you down? David runs to the desert caves, and this is where he is when he writes Psalm 142. It's a prayer song. And we don't know all that David was praying. I'm sure there are things he said that were not written down, and I imagine they might have gone something like this. God, what is happening here? I've been doing what you wanted. When you called me to be king, I went. When Saul needed someone at his side, I was there. All those crazy nights, those strange ways that Saul behaved, I saw the red flags. The prince, Jonathan, he saw the red flags. When I wondered if Saul could actually take care of your people, I stayed the course with the king. I protected him. I covered for him. Even when he lost his mind, I did not break trust. And then right in front of everybody, he throws his sword at me twice. I still went out to battle like a soldier. I stayed faithful to care for your people. I did not grasp for the throne. I never planned to betray Saul, though I could have. And now he accuses me of a coup? If I had wanted a coup, could have had one. The king is crazy. He is unstable. His family is weak, and the kingdom is in more trouble than they know. Yet David never broke trust with the king. And David took care of the people, like a shepherd running off wolves. What about you? Whose back did you have, and who let you down? I'm not going to pretend that I know why this story goes this way. Why couldn't David have had a smooth path? to the thing that he thought he was made for. Why did it have to get so messy? Because when God calls you to follow him, he may take you on a path you didn't expect. So David is alone, literally, hiding his physical body like a little kid playing hide and seek. The very king and friend that he thought would protect him has now betrayed him. And his best friend, the Prince Jonathan, who most understood how insane things really were back at the palace, had just sent him off to hide and run for his life. The very institution that he thought had his back, the political and religious institution, it has cast him out. They themselves bearing false witness to David's character. And he is alone and in a dark cave. Why? Why did he have to go through a cave? Maybe it has something to do with realigning your values. Maybe, just maybe, David was growing reliant on his royal connections, his special relationship with the king and the prince. So much at stake with his powerful friends. Sometimes the people that we thought we could most trust turn out to betray us, or at least severely disappoint us. In the end, all human love proves to be inadequate. Not just because God is bigger and better, but because we're broken. Even the best of relationships is only a shadow of what God means for us to be to one another. Even good friends grow weak and distracted. If you rely on anything more than you rely on God, it will eventually fail you. Then all you will have left is God. And maybe that's the way he wants it. In these moments, God wants us to crave him and to cry out to him. And so it is in this cave that David writes Psalm 142. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out my complaint before him. I tell my trouble. David has left everything behind, not just comfort, but friends, family, his life's meaning, and he's begging God for mercy out loud. And I think David really did cry out loud, because that's exactly what those words mean. Here he is, he's hiding in a cave, but he's shouting because he's in so much pain. What's deep inside is coming out. He's telling it all to Yahweh, the God who hears. You know, when you're going through something horrible, maybe even traumatic, you want to be heard. You need to be heard. It's instinctive to reach out to someone that we love. Maybe more instinctive for some than others. We are relational beings. And when things are hard, we look to the one that we love for comfort. God made us that way. We're meant to connect. We're wired for bonding. We aren't meant to face the world alone. But sometimes we need to be alone in a cave to remember that our first relational bond is with our Creator. And the thing we most need is what David asks for here. Mercy. Mercy. Undeserved loving kindness. David needed to know that God still had his back. And you know, when you're telling your troubles to a friend, you tell your story, sometimes you have to go way back. You have to give them the whole picture. If someone doesn't get the whole picture, they won't really understand the thing that's happening to you right now. And you know, not too many days ago, a person in our church had a father in the hospital with COVID, and I just thought about it and thought about it. 15 minutes couldn't go by without me thinking about it. But you know, even though it was so much on my mind and I was praying so much, I didn't know the whole story. I don't know that person's life story. I don't know all the ins and outs for what it means to have that kind of sickness in their family. So David says next, when my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who watch over my way. in the path where I walk. David continues his prayer. He says, hey, God, you watch my way. You know the path I walk. That's an ancient Hebrew expression for you know my life story. The before, the right now, even the after. God knows your history, even the parts you've never told anybody. He knows who the crazy people are in your family. He knows about that boss that reminds you of a jerk of a friend you had in high school. He knows how you feel when that song comes on the radio. He knows your playlist and why you like it. He knows your whole life story, even the parts you don't even know. God knew how hard David had tried to do what was right. Not perfectly, but God knew David's intentions and that they were honorable. Ever since the young girl started singing that song, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. God knew that Saul had been wrongly suspicious of David, called into question David's loyalty, made him out to be something that he never was, started bad-mouthing his own friends. Judgment, criticism. Trust that God knows your life story. He knows your motives. He knows how you've tried. It is you who watch over my way and the path where I walk. And then he goes on, people have hidden the snare for me. Look and see, there is nobody at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. Saul's men are hunting David down. There is a price on his head. And David prays, look, God. And I like this word in the psalm because the way the grammar is, it actually says, will you look? I mean, will you look at this? Just look at this. David wants to be sure that God knows he's friendless, that he has no place to run and nobody to care for him. And he says, I have no one at my right hand. You know what the right hand's for? It's your sword hand. And your right hand man, he stands over off to your right. While you're fighting in front, he's over there making sure nobody comes in trying to take off your arm. Okay? He understands your right hand man. He knows your battle strategies. He knows how you fight. He knows your business. And so it came to mean that. The person who really knows your business, takes care of your affairs. Somebody that is absolutely loyal and trustworthy. And that's what David had been to the king. And now he has nobody. Not one person in the royal court has run with him. Not one family member. And what's worse is nobody really gets his story. Nobody is there who understands that David has just lost everything. His reputation, his mission, his purpose, his friends, his band of brothers. Where is his help? In high places. You know, when a person comes to me for counseling, one of the most important things for me to get to know about them is, who is your right hand? Who is the person who really cares for you and looks out for you? Because I can tell you there is a direct connection between your support system and your level of happiness. And when you lose your support system, you will spiral into a serious depression. And that's where David says he's at. His spirit is faint. That's ancient Hebrew for seriously depressed. Depression is an appropriate response to this kind of loss. And when God calls you to follow him, you may have to go through a dark cave. Verse 5, I cry out to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I'm in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from this prison. So David feels his aloneness keenly. He's not just depressed. He is desperate and acutely aware of his weakness. And as he walks in and out of the cave, he literally has to look up, look around, look down around him, watching for a snare at his feet. He is hunted like game. See, I've been to this place where David was at, or at least where we think he might have been. I've been to En-Gedi, and En-Gedi is kind of like a mountainous outcrop right in the middle of the desert. It's all sand, and then you have this like kind of mountain range, greenery, and a stream, and a beautiful fountain. And so the goats come there to drink. And the goats, they're very, very fleet of foot. I mean, they make climbing on the side of a mountain look like it's absolutely nothing. And they're so fleet, they can jump right up into trees, climb up into the branches, and eat the leaves. They're amazing creatures. But if you knew their path, you could set a snare for them and have a barbecue. If your enemy cannot ruin you openly, he'll do it secretly. David knows he is as good as a dead man, with no hope but God. Who has power over you? Someone that you work with? Someone in your family? The government? The church? What will you do when the person who has the power to ruin you is stronger and more deceitful than you? You turn to someone who's bigger and truer. And it's in this moment that the psalm takes a turn. David tells God that he knows God is his portion and inheritance. And in other words, all that glitter that he left behind at the palace, all that glory, it's nothing to David compared to knowing God. God is the one who gives and takes away, but he never turns away. David may have lost his palace privileges, but God is nowhere close to the end of David's story. Nowhere close. When you cry out to God, his mercy will be enough for you. See, the psalm, it's taken a turn here. Much like our lives often change most radically at our darkest moments. So David, still the hunted one, living like he's in a prison. But he's got to come out for water and food at some time. And so on those trips out, he must have spied people coming, from a distance to that beautiful waterfall. And he would have stepped out maybe if they looked like they weren't Saul's men, to ask them if they knew anything about the king's men around, or maybe to ask if there was food that he could procure somewhere. He must have got brave enough to have done that. And as he does that, word starts to get around, and David starts to collect malcontents. The people who were on the outs with the government, on the outs with the regime, may be in debt and in trouble. And isn't it funny that every time that God wants to do something new and different, he chooses the people on the margins of society to do it? So now, here David is. He's still in the caves, but he's got some new, albeit somewhat crazy friends. They aren't who he expected them to be. They sure aren't royalty. They are ordinary people who need a shepherd. When you call out to God, he will give you friends. Set me free from my prison that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather about me. You see that? How does this end? The righteous gathered around him. The words here mean like they're flocked around him, like in a little circle. And it's funny because the translators can't decide if it's just friends who are righteous flocked around him, or if it means a reference to his coronation. But either way, it makes me happy, because these ragamuffin guys are kind of like the church. This church, maybe. They're now his new friends. And they're actually the good guys. And his family would come and arrive later, and they would hang out in the area righting wrongs like Robin Hood and his band of merry men. And eventually, they would become, when he became king, his courtiers, his cabinet, his ministers, or as the Bible calls them, his mighty men. David finishes the psalm saying that God did this because of his goodness, his mercy to him. When you feel like God has just pulled you off your path, life interrupted, cry out to God. He hears you. He knows your story. He will rescue you from your troubles, and he will bring you the people that you need.